Sabrina 2000s comic, issue 7. We start out with Sabrina and Chloe going jogging on a place literally called Jogging Trail. Sabrina thanks her for going slow and practicing with her. Wouldn't she have said thanks for her agreeing to do this before they started jogging? All the way back home? Sabrina says that everyone knows Chloe's the best runner in town. At least that's a positive trait for her to have. She's fit and athletic, and it gives her a career prospect as a marathon runner. I don't think it was that hard for the writer to come up with this idea for, though. But I'm excited to see her again. I remember the stories with her in it are more likely to be good. Sabrina says that Chloe's guaranteed to win the 5K fun race this afternoon. Chloe stays humble about it instead of being arrogant, thankfully. And what's even better is that the money from the race goes to charity, and that's what she really cares about. Just charity. It could raise awareness for an actual charity anyways. Then a bad guy runs past her leaving dust behind, so fast that realistically it'd have to be the work of magic. The person calls her ridiculous and says that only winning matters because he's a straw man. Oh, it's a girl. I thought it'd be a male witch that Sabrina and Chloe knew. That'd have made more sense. It's Jem, not Sonic. Why does Jem have to show up at even the weakest possible excuse? I never thought she'd be a part of the plot because it's about intensive physical activity. I thought she was the stereotypical mean rich girl, which would mean she'd have no business competing with them in a marathon. It would give her a bit of unexpected character depth if it turned out she was really athletic too. I mean, she is a cheerleader, and that's intense physical activity right there. So she would be trained to handle even more activity. But come on, why is she in this plot? She better get humiliated constantly. I figured it'd be a different character, not one that has no right to be overused considering that she's awful and such a cliche that she's already in millions of franchises in spirit anyways. I'm somehow expected to believe she was running so fast because she bought rocket blade shoes. Please explain that they're magical. Otherwise the plot will lose all credibility. It also loses credibility if it's not explained that the reason she'll be able to cheat with these shoes is that the judges will be bribed. But even then, that wouldn't be enough. There's shoes in real life that make running easier. And they're banned from marathons. And that's not even an unregulated pair of rocket shoes. How does she get the shoes to slow down? She fortunately explains that she has a switch on her watch. Sabrina says that jetpack boosters aren't legal, and she says her lawyers already have an injunction. That's a shitty hand wave. If the writer thought about the plot hole that destroys their entire story, they should have given up on doing it anyways. Jem's horrible writing is enough to ruin a story whether it's got Chloe or not, because there's been so many Sabrina stories that I can afford to be picky. Chloe says Jem makes her mad and makes it clear that if she had magical powers, she'd abuse them against Jem. I can't blame her for this, even if it doesn't make her look good, because almost no one would be able to resist the temptation. Sabrina being a novice witch isn't an excuse. She's a reckless teenage girl. Finally, because Jem taunts them, Sabrina generates a heat wave and ruins her shoes already. Jem complains that she'll never win now because there's no time to order new ones. Then she immediately smirks and thinks she'll have to go to plan B, so why did she ask how she was gonna win? It was smart of her to have a plan B. I'm proud of the writer for not somehow getting her entered in the contest and making her not be disqualified with those shoes. Chloe thanks Sabrina for keeping it real, and they high-five as Jem's right behind them. And logically she'd be confused because she doesn't know it's all Sabrina's fault. Why else would they be acting like that? Though you'd think she'd eventually catch on that every time she's around Sabrina, especially if she's mean to her, something bad happens to her, and stay the hell away from her. Not every instance of bad luck is obviously attributable to magic, so she'd still remember all of the events that aren't too obvious about magic. But I guess any time she considers that Sabrina is just a jinx, she dismisses that as superstitious. I just wanted to not be in the series. I didn't miss Libby when she went away. We cut ahead in time in the limo, where it's fortunately explained that the reason someone's gonna work for Jem in a plan against Sabrina is that he'll get a big payday from it. She explains that she's paying someone to impersonate her at the end of the race because he looks enough like her from the back, especially with the right wig. He explains that he's the shortest and fastest guy on the state university team. Jem tells the limo driver to see to it that he shaves, but the game would be given away the minute anyone saw his face anyways. So she just wants to make him look better. Jem starts wheezing and panting as she runs behind Sabrina, and Sabrina teases her for it right away. I'm glad she's not being an unrelatable goody two-shoes, and Chloe's naturally telling her to ignore her and run. Never mind, Sabrina asks her what's the matter as Jem says ow. Granted, we need more people like this in the world, but it's impossible for her to be a good audience surrogate at times like this. Chloe naturally tells her to forget Jem and go. She's the only one in the main cast with a brain in her head. Jem smirks, implying that she's faking it as one of her eyes looks pretty freaky all of a sudden. Like she's a cyborg with one blue eye and one black eye. I thought she was hurt since she interrupted herself, but it's probably that she was cramping and just got self-conscious at someone she was planning against pitying her. As she immediately tells Sabrina to take off when she idealistically hoped this was the one time she'd reach out to her. No, Jem becoming a sweet, nice friend of hers would be sweet. Character development, what's that? She could be interesting in other ways than being a bitch. She could have hobbies. Aspirations. Sabrina immediately gets told to take off, and is smart enough to do so. Logically, she'd have a really tough, if not impossible time catching up with everyone else after she slowed down so much. She's already guaranteed she won't get first place. Not that she cares. So if she doesn't care, why should I be invested in whether Sabrina will win the race or not? Gemma hides behind the bushes and whispers to her limo driver that she's here and tells him to send out her ringer. I guess she pays him to do what she wants, otherwise why would he care? She gives Not Jem a compliment for wearing lipstick and eye makeup for the extra touch. I don't even know his name. And he hopes the NCAA never hears about what he's doing. It's interesting that he shows no shame in this scheme whatsoever. He's entertaining, being carefree and happy about the money. I can't blame him for wanting the money. But it'd be even more understandable if I knew what the pay was. Then Not Jem attracts attention to himself by knocking over Sabrina with his elbow, while telling her not to cut him off, to try to keep his cover to anyone who didn't see him do it. He did this because he was just paid extra to, and for all he knew, if he didn't do it, he wouldn't get the money he was promised initially. But logically, you'd think that doing this would disqualify Jem immediately. Not to mention the fact that his voice would obviously not be Jem's voice. Unless he's really good at imitating Jem's voice. How is he kicking up that much dust when running past Chloe? And he pushes his way through the runners too. Again, that'd get him disqualified. Even if there aren't cameras filming the entirety of the race, like a flying helicopter or camera somewhere, the fact remains that the racers would still be able to tell people about this. It'd be satisfying if the reason this plan of Jem's would backfire would partially be that he would get her disqualified, in a surprisingly realistic outcome. Sabrina considerately tells Chloe to go catch Jem and not worry about her because she's gonna take a break at the rest stop up ahead. Chloe asks if she's sure, showing that she really does care about her. She's not a fair weather friend like all the so-called friends of that girl in the Proud family. Decades later, and that's the only thing I remember about that show. And why is Not Jem drawn with spinny feet? Like the dust thing, that works for Sonic because he has magic and is running as fast as sound. Salem's at the rest stop holding some water for her. I wish this was foreshadowed. Anyways, Sabrina says she's gonna clean up the scrape on her leg. Fortunately, there's a touching moment as Salem actually shows concern for her leg. Out of complete nowhere, Salem immediately knows that Not Jem is a guy in a wig because he's been around for over 600 years, so he knows a bad wig when he sees one. Well, Sabrina and Chloe didn't, and neither did anyone else. And that was justified because Not Jem was running really fast the whole time. Salem barely got a look at him. And besides, he was expecting to see Jem, so his brain was more likely to assume it was Jem and dismiss any suspicion. He could have assumed it was Jem wearing a wig because she lost her hair for some reason. Like she got gum in it and had to get it shaved. This is so insulting just to force Salem to be the guy who tells Sabrina what's going on, when it could have easily had faster pacing by having Sabrina figure out the truth the second she heard Not Jem talk. Just because they're younger doesn't mean it makes sense for them to be brainless. You'd think Salem would mention the voice. It's not live action. So the comic's giving me no indication of why he thinks the convincing looking wig is unconvincing. Sabrina gets mad, and Salem frustrates me by telling her not to stoop to her level by using magic to even up the score, and then he turns invisible and says that's his job. Then why the fuck was he lecturing her when he's okay with doing it? He would be encouraging her. he'd work as the devil on her shoulders. Sabrina tells him nothing messy this time. This is a horrible protagonist. Granted, even the 70s Sabrina had her moments where she refused to use magic and wanted to do things the mortal way and feel like a normal person. But those were rare enough to be harmless and were vastly overshadowed by her uses and abuses of magic. Salem shouldn't be the only entertaining one in the family. That doesn't make him a good character. He's the only one who shouldn't even have magic. Why not have Hilda in this role? Jem gets out of the limo, telling Watkins to drive ahead to the finish line because she doesn't want the sweaty punk in her limo. She means again, right? I hope the writer meant again. Jem yells at what she thinks is not Jem to stop running towards her, and then it turns out it's Salem as he reveals his true form and jumps towards her, scaring her into fainting. And nobody's gonna question why a cat's racing behind Sabrina on its hind legs. Do the spy witches have to erase mortal memories every time people spot him walking? He wouldn't be allowed to do that so much then. He'd be fined for it at least. Realistically, Sabrina comes in last, and it's not as depressing as it could be because she doesn't mind. And it turns out that Chloe came in first place because she's the main character. I never expected her to get literally first place. Second, maybe. The ending was already happy enough with Jem getting her just desserts and Sabrina being in a good mood. This extra thing feels like it only happened because it's a work of fiction, and that takes me out of it. Logically, Chloe would have been too far behind all the other racers to ever possibly win first place because she stayed behind with Sabrina when Sabrina was hurt. How good is her acceleration? That's just unrealistic. There's plenty of great runners out there, and prodigies do exist, but maybe just a few more stories before this should have referenced her being a great runner first. I'm sorry, it just seems lazy to ever be great at running out of nowhere. I immediately got an idea in my head of where the writer got that inspiration from. Does he make her great at basketball too? Good for her if she has fun with it. And it's certainly more interesting that she's doing this and not Harvey, who would be the obvious choice for an actually lazy writer, because he's the guy and this is a sports event. But instead a girl was picked. The story started out with one of them saying that winning wasn't what mattered, and all Chloe really cared about was that the money from the race would go to charity. I guess we might have been better off not being told what that charity was, because it'd be depressing if we were told about the people who need help from the charity. Still, it'd take one Google search to find a realistic charity cause for a marathon. The story ends with a shockingly cruel punishment for not Jem, who's being arrested for streaking because it turns out Salem outright robbed him of his clothes and wig. And someone's even taking a picture of him. Good thing the cops or whatever happened to have a blanket to hide him with it. It was needlessly cruel of Salem to do that. I assumed he just sapped up a copy of his clothes and wig. He had a sympathetic enough motivation. Granted, it's bad to be greedy, but it's still understandable to most people that someone would want a ton of money. He was being a violent jerk to the other racers, but then he should have been pushed over himself. I'd rather see him get physical slapstick than see him deal with this. Something that worst case scenario would get him put on a certain list, ruining his life. The punishment he gets has nothing to do with what he was doing wrong. And somehow, the goody two-shoes Sabrina, who went out of her way to comfort Jem, her only reaction to seeing that Salem did this was to go, "Oh, Salem," as if it was actually supposed to be a funny ending. It's hard to believe this happened in a kids' comic. The next story starts out with Salem telling Sabrina that his appeal to the other realm was upheld. He explained the situation with Boru the Warlock to his superiors, and they somehow ruled in his favor. Sure, it was just playing a video game, but he still talked like he was glorifying trying to take over the world. So that's insultingly unrealistic. Out of complete nowhere, Salem reveals that he gets to spend 1 week as a human being. That's dumb. I'm waiting to be told why, and it's not happening. I wish it was explained that this is just a test by the Witches' Council to see what he'll do as a human to see if he's truly reformed. It's especially suspicious since he said he could be whoever he wants, including an astronaut or fireman. Sabrina says she'll turn off the TV to help him decide. Out of complete nowhere, Salem cares enough to ask what she's watching when he was just focused on himself before. So he looks at the screen and decides to be a cowboy. What does that mean? He's gonna threaten people with guns? Isn't that all they do? So he's already wasted his week and proven he can't be trusted. Oh, there is some kind of catch. Zelda tells Salem that according to the paper she has, if he uses any magic during the week at all, he'll immediately turn back into a cat. I guess they think it'd still be fair to turn him back into a cat if he used magic to save his own life, because he got himself into that situation. I guess they're just doing a really broad spell here instead of taking forever to decide which spell in which context is acceptable. It's the most responsible thing to do, but it makes me question once again why he's allowed to keep his magic as a cat if they think it's fair to keep him from using it at all, even using it for good, which would just punish him for being good. Salem gets booked a flight to the Wild West, as I'm already disappointed with how silly and goofy this is compared to the 90s comic story where he became a human. At least it was cool that he drove a motorcycle and made it fly, won a fight by making his chin hard, and wore a cool jacket. This story is just making him look ridiculous. At least the 90s comic had human Salem seem cool, if stupidly reckless, and everything worked out great for him in the end. He just ended the story partying. Part of the whole appeal to seeing human Salem is that we get some insight into what he was like before he was a cat. We'd get to see what he would do normally. He obviously wasn't a cowboy. Despite Salem being warned about a testy horse, he immediately tames it and says that it takes one to know one. A better explanation could be that after all his days as a cat with nothing productive to do, he did research on horses. Salem says it was a great first day as he leads the horse to take a drink from the creek. He says he loves the peace and quiet, and then he hears some whining. It turns out some abandoned lion cubs want him to follow him, and he magically knows that because he speaks the universal language of cat that can't exist. That's dumb. He's not using magic. He sees that their mother fell and broke her leg. Instead of even thinking about calling Sabrina and asking for help, he just fixes the leg himself and is returned to being a cat. And the story ends with him cheerfully making a pun, as he's obviously failing at hitchhiking because he's a cat. Logically, he just warped back to Sabrina. Why isn't anyone panicking at a cat standing up with his thumb up and stopping to take a picture? Wanted someone kidnap him to use him in a circus or make a video? This Salem is stupid. We barely got to see him being a cowboy at all. We start out the next story with Sabrina starting to plan her summertime activities with a calendar. And Hilda asks what she's doing. I'm guessing she's gonna be the harbinger of disappointment and immediately swamp her with magic homework without warning or something because she's got her hopes up. That's what assholes her aunts are in this comic. Instead of magic homework, she does something else that's abusive. Her aunts have decided on their own that she should also get a job this summer, which she isn't happy about. You guys, you do realize she has centuries of adult life to have a job, right? Whatever happens to getting to enjoy your youth? These people are assholes. Sure, it's well-intentioned because justification is it'll teach you responsibility. But this isn't Hilda to me. I can name 2 different Hildas that won't be in this position. It should be Zelda doing this. Hilda says that she can play with her friends on her time off anyways. And Sabrina points out that she's too young for a job. Hilda says Alexander the Great conquered half the world by the time he was her age. What, 13? I hate these meddling aunts! She says that her vacation's over before it ever started. Yeah, it's called summer vacation. The 70s comic had her enjoy all summer long, getting to go to the beach as many times as she wanted. Salem immediately shrugs it off, not caring at all, and just wants to get a snack. She plans on making sure she doesn't get a job. She says to a phone, "What's that? You say I'm too young for the job?" Okay. Is she just lying? She says that the child labor laws are going to keep her home all summer. She's at least trying to put the odds in her favor by pretending to be on Hilda's side, though she was really obvious about being against this when she growled behind her. Sabrina should have warped away, or brainwashed her, but instead she ran away. So Hilda had the time to tell her to stop because she knows someone in the supernatural world who would have a job for her. Why would the witches' world have laxer child labor laws? A short time later, we see them in a deserted alley in the city. Hilda says some magic words. Magic words that are actually copyrighted by a magician that tried to sue the Pokemon series over them. But I guess this comic got away with that just because the words were misspelled. And he didn't read this comic. She says the password spell and a secret store comes into focus. How do they advertise? Witches shop here all the time. And the cashier says it's nice to see Sabrina and asks if Hilda's here for some supplies. Oh, he's referring to Hilda, not Sabrina. What kind of cashier refers to a regular customer by their last name? Hilda said she was wondering if Sabrina could work here part-time. And he says that he could use some help, implying that this is the first time he's considered the idea. Resumes? What's that? He agrees immediately instead of it being realistic, because I guess he's a fan of making split-second decisions, and the job is something anyone could do. I would say that Sabrina should just do a horrible job on purpose, but I'm guessing her shitty aunts would just punish her severely for it and make her scrub the floors all day or something. The animated series just comes off as cruel to Sabrina in comparison. I can understand the appeal if she had to deal with just physical slapstick, but not this mean-spirited crap. What kind of parental figures would rob their kid of summer vacation on a whim? If you asked the kid, she'd probably think that was one of the worst things you could do. Kids look forward to summer vacation for months on end. We see Sabrina gets scared at seeing a giant, asking if some shirts come in his size. Then she apologizes to a stereotypical witch, saying that the coupon expired hundreds of years ago. That witch just makes me wish I was reading the 70s comic. Since when does this comic show witches like this? Then out of nowhere, it turns out the nice boss is actually a cruel and sadistic jerk, who forced Sabrina to carry every cauldron one by one, just to change his mind with a smirk and tell her to stack the cauldrons on the other side of the store. Why didn't anyone simply float them? Then a newt asks for an eye of newt, and Sabrina uses magic to make a mop move by itself to clean up an aisle right as she's being told to do that. Thankfully, this doesn't somehow backfire on her just because she's using her magic, because it was just a montage. I wish she wanted to get that job, and the story started here. Because this could be interesting. Despite the cauldron panel, Sabrina somehow says that her first day wasn't too bad. Realistically, wouldn't she tell someone about that bullshit? Wouldn't the manager get in trouble with her aunts? She somehow says that he's a good boss because the writing has no self-awareness at all. She says that the job pays really well, but in order to pay her salary, all of the store's prices will be going up by 30%, and they aren't happy to hear that. Which predictably leads to Zelda calling the boss and saying that Sabrina won't be able to work for him anymore. If the writer thought about the story, this would have happened because she told her aunts about what happened in that cauldron panel. Instead, it had no consequences, and I end the story still being mad at her aunts because they didn't get any real comeuppance. All they did was prove that they really are selfish people, because they don't really care about teaching her responsibility. They ended the plot before that could happen. When you're writing a story, you're supposed to have the people who pissed off the audience get punished for it. That's basic shit. This isn't real life. I'd find the sitcom boring if I watched it again. Its episodes are too long, and I always remembered Sabrina being an annoying idiot character. But at least in that show, they had subplots dedicated to the ants, which fleshed them out as people, which was necessary to make them sympathetic characters to make up for how needlessly strict they could be with Sabrina. Still, she shouldn't have needed an Aunt Vesta to have a fun aunt. That should have been Hilda. I just remember one time where Hilda was standing next to Zelda looking just as mad as Zelda. At least criminal villains and bullies aren't karma Houdinis. This issue was by Mike Gallagher. The first story was about Chloe and Sabrina entering a race for charity, establishing at the start that they don't really care about doing as great as possible. And Jem thankfully doesn't get to enter the race with the ridiculously unrealistic rocket shoes. And instead it turns out she just happens to know someone who can impersonate her in the race if she pays him to. So there's an understandable motivation for the villain. Eventually, Salem uses magic to ruin Jem's plan by robbing the guy of his clothes and wig. The Sabrina I know would have been proactive enough to do it herself. I barely had anything to complain about in it. But not Jem should have been written to talk when trying to impersonate a girl. Because they should have known it was not Jem. And it should have been given a name at least. That was lazy. The second story is about Salem getting to be a human for a week for no apparent reason, with a ridiculously broad catch that if he uses any magic, his week will be cut short, even if it's to heal a lion's broken leg. Obviously, they'd know when he was using magic, only because they were spying on him. The 90s comic did this concept in a way more entertaining and grounded way. Supposedly, he's being a cowboy because he miraculously cared about what Sabrina was watching on television when he was just focused on himself, so the story wouldn't have happened. All that happened because he was playing cowboy was that he rode a horse in one panel and then got led by lion cubs to their mother. At least it was unique and a twist that he didn't abuse his powers and do dangerous, reckless things. But that's what we look forward to. It's Salem. It was just aggravating that he got turned back into a cat for being good. This story was just okay, I guess. I kinda missed the entire point of a human Salem. Because this isn't how he'd be as a human. It's how a cowboy would be. The third story really pissed me off because Sabrina didn't want to get that job. Instead, Hilda predictably decided to ruin her plan to enjoy summer vacation and forced her to get a job where she was forced to lift up and carry a huge amount of cauldrons. How is the job supposed to teach her responsibility? She already had to go to school her whole life. She already had to go to school without using magic. She was already being told not to use magic. Once they zap up a baby doll that needs to be taken care of if they want to teach her responsibility? How about zapping up a puppy? That'd make her happy because it's cute and teach her responsibility because she has to look after it. And the only reason she lost the job was because her aunts didn't want the prices at the store to go up.